Welcome back, dear learners, to the second part of Module 1, Developing Soft and Management Skills. Here, the highlights of the lectures are technical communication and its approaches, understanding levels of communication, third, how a language acts as a barrier to communication, and fourth, minimizing the barriers to communication, and fifth, classification of barriers to communication. Now let us see technical communication and its approaches. In part 1 of my lecture, we learnt the characteristic of technical communication, that is, technical communication is different from general communication. It is purely concerned with well-defined business activities. It is a matter of freedom to express one's view. One who is confident and proficient in his subject can express and share his knowledge. It is also committed to principles that should not be overruled. Certain other characteristics are unambiguous, concise, courteous, and objective. Technical communication is essential in an organization because it serves as a medium to share the information. People who are working in a company should have a mutual understanding which can be attained by sharing their knowledge. This technical communication turns out to be effective when researches are made and they are conveyed to each other. Students of today are given practice to apply the basic science and mathematics principles notably. They are being trained in the theoretical and practical oriented spaces. But a question comes, where does the technical application goes? Technical communication is very significant for practical application of sciences, for learning the mechanics of technology, for the promotion of technological research, and for training the technical professionals. The significance, extent, and coverage of technical English in engineering field. Engineering is a field where students are being trained with practical and technical applications. The significance of this technical jobs is being increasing day by day. Predominantly, the training and the interest of engineering students lies in technical parts. Engineering students pursue their technical task without getting necessary writing practices. Unless they prove themselves among the co-workers, their technical skills will go unrecognized. If technical people cannot interact with others about what they are doing, what exactly is it about, there is no use being a technologist. Engineers have the responsibility to outwin the others. It is also their duty to transmit their works both verbally and writing. For presenting their job effectively, influentially, and understandably, they need good communication skills. When technical jobs are concerned, communication tasks like writing, public speaking, listening play a very major role. People in technical field must be well trained to execute their knowledge in a very brief manner for the specialist and the expanded form for the non-specialist. They should make understand even the non-technical people by this simple and neat work. The writers must be aware of what they are presenting, familiar with the technical terms. If they are, they can make people understand easily. The versatility and dimension of technical communication. It is very essential in all the fields nowadays since everything is computerized today. Technical communication is important in any field of work where tasks are being done technically. If people have no technical knowledge, they cannot communicate with their co-workers. If they cannot communicate, they cannot exhibit their work done, which results in the technical errors and exploitation of their talents. So, technical domains can be of any kind, including the soft and hard science, high technology using computers and softwares, consumer electronics, and business processes and practices. There are different approaches to technical communication. The first one we look at is brevity. Brevity is defined as shortness in duration and or conciseness of expression in a speech or a written text. You might ask, how brief? Well, as brief as possible, but not so brief that the message doesn't get across. Brevity depends on the messages being conveyed, governed by the social relationship. Brevity and conciseness are different in the sense that the former relates to the matter and the latter to the styles. Brevity merely implies the use of few words, while conciseness implies a great deal of matter concentrated in a small space. For example, the best practice is to avoid sentences or words that convey no meaning. Common redundant words include free gifts, whereas free is redundant, advance reservation, where advance has no meaning, and similar lexical misuses. Eliminating such redundant words or phrases adds power to the messages. The second point is objectivity. Objective communication or writing you can verify through evidence and facts. If you are communicating or writing objectively, you must remain as neutral as possible through the use of facts, statistics, and research. It is best used when you need to present unbiased information to an audience and then let them determine their own opinion. News reports and school textbooks often use objective writing. It is important to differentiate objective communication from subjective writing, which is writing that is you cannot evaluate, calculate, or verify. Subjective communication or writing might express feelings, opinions, and judgments. Objective communication or writing is fact driven and subjective writing is opinion driven. To keep your communication or writing objective, try to follow these tips. 1. Be specific instead of vague or general. Instead of speaking or writing, almost everyone voted for me, write 82% of the company voted for him. Do not use opinionated or prejudiced or exclusive language. Rather than saying men and girls, say. Avoid using first person to keep it more professional and less about you. Instead of I believe, try using a fact or credible source to prove your point, like according to John 1999. Try not to over exaggerate your communication or writing. Avoid use of words such as really, always, never, or very. These words can make your communication appear falsified or weak. Instead of the race was really close, be more informational by saying the race was close enough to demand appreciation. Simplicity. In technical language encourages shorter sentences and use of the simple facts, words, and phrases possible. It explains how to achieve simplicity by using active rather than passive style, personal rather than impersonal style. Readers may prefer a document that is a bit more technical in nature, but more that one which is simplified. simplicity is valued greatly in technical world. The fourth one is utility. This relates to the utility of technical publications. Who is going to make use of such written material or materials, or how is it useful for readers? For example, manuals written on how to operate a device. David Dobrin in 1983 famously claimed that technical writing is writing that accommodates technology to users, but it would be more accurate to say that technical writing accommodates users to technology. Technical documentation does not typically change the machine, whether hardware or software or the system. It changes user behavior to make interaction with the machine more successful in terms of the use of machine. The immediate goal of user documentation is to teach users how to make the machine work as the designers intended, not necessarily as the user's desire. If the machine itself is deficient, technical communication is powerless to fix it. The fourth point is clarity. The key to effective communication is clarity. It should be understandable and has a single meaning. Clarity entails making the subject as well as the opinion or remark about the subject very clear without leaving anything to the listener's or reader's assumption. Lack of clarity is the primary cause of miscommunication and misunderstanding, not just in workplace but also in personal life as well. For example, the statement, "We will talk today in the evening," lacks clarity, whereas "We will meet at 5 p.m. today in my office" is clear. Now, how do we understand the levels of communication? Communication works at different levels: extrapersonal communication, intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication, organizational communication, and mass communication. So, we look into detail what are these barriers. Extrapersonal communication between human beings and non-human entities is called extrapersonal communication. For example, your parrot responding to your greetings. In this type of communication, understanding is required because between the sender and the receiver responds in the sign language. The second one, intrapersonal communication. Interpersonal communication takes place within the individual. For example, you may think of an idea in your mind and then decide to share with your friend or not. Or else you might listen to your friend and then think about it in your mind. You might respond or you may not. Let us take another example. One might feel cold and the information is sent to the brain, and thus one might decide whether to wear warm clothes, responding to the instruction sent from the brain to an action taken. Here, sender acts as our relevant organ and the receiver is our brain, and the feedback by brain depends on our action. Interpersonal communication refers to the sharing of information among people around us. Interpersonal communication can be both formal or informal. It encompasses spoken, written, and non-verbal form of communication. For example, interaction with family members, friends, and others, it depends upon variety of factors like psychology of two parties, relationship between them, the situation in which the communication takes place. Organizational communication is communication that takes place at the different hierarchical levels in an organization. Since a large number of employees are involved in different activities, the need to communicate becomes greater in an organization. This kind of communication can be within an organization, such as intra-operational or inter-operational. Lastly, the mass communication is through mass media like books, journals, TV, newspapers, etc. For this kind of information, we require a mediator to transmit information. Now, how language acts as a barrier? Barriers can emanate from either sender or receiver and circumstances of communication. In real communicative situation, any interferences or noise can complicate the communication process and interfere with our message. They are generally created by improper coding. If one of the recurrent barrier in the process of communication, if there is a lack of understanding on the part of the receiver, it leads to confusion and misunderstanding. Therefore, decoding of message must be done in the linguistic code familiar to the listener. Selection of improper medium can lead to communication breakdown. The second one is bypassing. This occurs due to the misunderstanding of words and sentences. A word may have different meanings according to context or cultural differences. Words may mean different things to different people. To avoid such, one should use familiar words with concrete meaning. Before communicating, one must also know that the background of your audience. It is very important. And the third one is frame of reference. Weaving others within the frame of reference may also lead to confusion and misunderstanding. Your frame of reference is individual to you and based on your experiences, exposure, education, personality and several other factors peculiar to you. To avoid such, one must be sensitive and try to put yourself in other person's position. The fourth one is physical distraction. During communication, one should avoid physical discomfort. A person cannot be a good speaker or a good listener under such circumstances. Number 5th is psychological and emotional interferences. Lack of interest or concentration, feelings of sadness, anger, fear, anxiety or jubilation influences our reception and receptivity to others' ideas. Communication may affect adversely if one is emotionally charged. And the 6th one is cultural differences. Different cultures has different practices and understanding. Lack of understanding other cultures may create misunderstanding. One should be sensitive to cultural differences. There are some points to minimize barriers to communication. Know your audience before you communicate. Number 2, try to experience the world from the receiver's perspective. 3, use an appropriate form or style of communication. 4, encode your message well. 5th, avoid physical and physiological barriers. 6th, listen and read carefully. 7th, be precise and to the point. Avoid information overloaded. Don't add too many information in one paragraph. Be open, frank and be positive. And finally, appreciate and understand cultural differences. The classification of barriers to communications. Every individuals are unique due to differences in perception, experience, education, culture and personality. That is your temperament, way of talking, mood, involvement, either you are introvert or extrovert, etc. There are basically three types of barriers based according to the process of message formation and delivery. The first one is interpersonal barrier, 2 interpersonal barrier, and 3 organizational barrier. In intrapersonal barrier takes place within an individual. We interpret the same information in a different ways as our thinking varies. These differences lead to interpersonal barrier. It can be caused by one, wrong assumption. It is the communication fails because the message is not understood well and the person assumes it. For example, doctor's prescription. Many times we misunderstand what the prescription is, thus creating barrier. The person's inability to understand is shaped by one's experience. The second one is varied perception. Our perception varies because of our past experience and knowledge. One must take a wide, unbiased perspective if problems arises. Number 3, differing background. A person's background depends on education, culture, language, environment and other socio-economic factors. Our background plays a significant role in how we interpret a message. One has to know the background of the audience so that the listener can comprehend the message. No two persons can have the same background. The fourth point is wrong inferences. Inferences are sometimes far from facts, which can provide scope for gossips and rumors to spread. The next point is blocked categories. We react to information positively or negatively depending on our views and attitudes. For example, people resist to new changes or say new technology and criticize them and are often prejudiced. People with closed minds are known as misogynists. They ignore variation and differences. The last point is categorical thinking. There are two types of people. One is pansophist, that those are the people who thinks of themselves as all wise, claiming to possess universal knowledge. The others are narcissists, the one who is self-obsessed. Therefore, good communication should be non-judgmental, be empathetic, avoid assuming, stick to the subject, never generalize, and learn to paraphrase. The second point to barrier is interpersonal barrier. It occurs due to inappropriate transaction of words between two or more people. This is a result of the limitation in the communication skills of the encoder or the decoder or of both. The most common reasons for interpersonal barriers are: 1. That is limited vocabulary. Inadequate vocabulary can be a major hindrance in communication. If you are at a loss of words, you leave a poor impression on the listener. If you have a large vocabulary and you do not know how to use it, it is of no use. The literal and intended or implied meaning should be clear to the audience. The second one is incompatibility of verbal and non-verbal messages. Non-verbal cues provide a deeper meaning to the sender's message. One should not only try to accurately guess other non-verbal cues, but also be aware of one's own body language. Non-verbal cues should match with your verbal message. The third one, emotional outburst. Emotional outburst such as happiness, excitement, anger or boredom affect and interfere in communication. Messages are interpreted, misinterpreted, ignored and overreacted by displaying such behavior. The next point is cultural variations. Communication selectivity. Communication selectivity, we mean here that both speaker and listener should be attentive while communicating. Paying attention to what one likes and ignoring other parts of communication imposes a barrier known as communication selectivity. The next one is cultural variations. So, as we have learnt before also, before communicating with others, one must be aware of the listener's background. One must overcome the communicative inadequacy arising due to the different culture and languages. The next point is another barrier to interpersonal communication is poor listening skills. Listening and hearing are not the same. So, hearing is a passive exercise while listening requires careful attention and accurate decoding of the signals received from the speaker. Emotional disturbances, indifferences, aggressions and wandering attentions are few distractions which can hinder your listening skills. The next point is noise in the channels. This can also act as a barrier to your interpersonal communication, like your visual, audiovisual, written, physical or physiological forms may interfere in the transmission of signals or messages. The third point is organizational barrier. Communication barriers are not only limited to an individual or two people, but exist in entire organization. Every organization differs from one another and has its own communication techniques. Every organization has the formal or informal setup of communication. The hierarchical structure restricts the flow of communication and is most of the time rigid in an organization. The main organizational barriers are there are too many transfer stations. If in an organization there are more links, then greater the chances of miscommunication. Employees may filter out parts of messages and the original message might get distorted. If there are many links, it acts as an obstacle to effective communication. The second point is fear of superiors. Organization should create an environment which enable people to talk freely to seniors or subordinates. The next one is negative tendencies. We often see that communication barrier exists due to conflicts of ideas between members and non-members of a group. Once these negative tendencies develop, they create noise in the interpersonal communication. Use of inappropriate media. So, this is also another point learners must note down, that media or medium of communication should be appropriate while communicating. It depends on the occasion of or event one communicates. One should consider time, cost and type of messages and intended audiences. For example, telephone may not be the right medium to convey confidential informations. The last one is information overloaded. In an organization, one should get loaded with information. Very often, vital and relevant information gets mixed up with too many irrelevant details. I hope the lecture is useful to you. Record your own speech and ask your friends to rate it, or you can ask them, how do you communicate when you are friendly? You are in anger or in extreme happiness? Take the feedback from your friends and try to overcome your barriers. Thank you.